We tend to think of old books as, well, kind of dusty, right? Relics from a world that doesn't really exist anymore. But what if I told you that inside these very stories, there's a living, breathing guide to the exact same conflicts we face every single day?
Seriously? What if those pages hold the keys to understanding our own struggles? With our identity, our ambitions, and some of the toughest moral choices we'll ever have to make? It's a pretty wild thought, isn't it?
And that's really the heart of it. These aren't just quaint little tales. They're a blueprint for the human condition, laid out by authors who are grappling with the very same stuff we are today. Who am I? What do I want? And what am I willing to do to get it?
So let's start with the biggest question of all, right? The search for self. It's this constant battle we fight, both inside our own heads and against what society expects of us. And believe it or not, few stories capture this more powerfully, and frankly, more terrifyingly, than one from over a century ago.
We're talking about Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper. It's about a woman whose identity is just systematically erased by the very people who claim they're trying to help her. It's a psychological horror story where the real monster isn't some ghost hiding in the shadows. It's the slow, creeping, terrifying loss of your own self.
So just look at this contrast between the official diagnosis and the brutal reality. She's told she has a temporary nervous depression, and the so-called cure is total inactivity and isolation. But for her, this cure was really a prison. Her voice was completely dismissed, her illness totally misunderstood. It was basically a form of 19th century medical gaslighting. And as a result, her sense of self just completely fell apart.
And this is where that infamous yellow wallpaper comes in. It's not just ugly decor. It becomes her obsession. It's a symbol of all the oppressive forces boxing her in. She starts to see a woman trapped behind the patterns, creeping around, and it's a perfect, haunting reflection of her own confinement and her desperate, desperate need to break free.
That struggle for who you are is so often tangled up in another powerful idea, something that's practically woven into the fabric of American culture, the pursuit of the American dream. It's this ideal we all know, but these old stories, they force us to look a little closer at the promise and at the hidden price tag.
The classic definition, right? It promises that if you work hard, you'll get ahead, you'll find success. But these authors, they were already poking holes in that idea a long, long time ago. They were showing how the relentless chase for wealth and status could lead you not to happiness, but to this profound, echoing emptiness.
So, what is the real cost of chasing an illusion? What happens when you finally get everything you thought you wanted and you realize it's not even close to being enough?
Well, F. Scott Fitzgerald just nails this in Winter Dreams. The main character, Dexter Green, spends his entire life chasing money and what he thinks is the perfect woman. He gets it all, but finds that achieving his dreams just leaves him completely hollow. The story is this incredible critique of that kind of romantic idealism. It shows that when you pin all your hopes on some perfect, shiny vision of success, the end of that road is almost always disillusionment. The dream, as it turns out, can be a pretty cold and lonely place.
And that leads us straight into our final theme, the absolute agony of moral choice. What do you do when your loyalty to your own family goes head-to-head with your conscience? When doing the right thing means betraying everything and everyone you've ever known?
For this, let's meet a young boy named Sardy Snopes from William Faulkner's Barn Burning. His father, Abner, is this bitter, vengeful man who gets his revenge on the world by secretly burning down people's barns. And Sardy is just trapped. He feels what Faulkner calls the old, fierce pull of blood, that primal, gut-wrenching need to be loyal, even as he watches his father do these awful, awful things.
You can almost feel Sardy's world cracking apart step by step. He starts with this blind, unquestioning loyalty. But with every fire he witnesses, his conscience gets louder and louder until he finally hits his breaking point. He makes this absolutely devastating choice. He warns his father's next victim, literally betraying his own blood for a higher sense of justice. It's a choice that saves his soul but completely shatters his world.
But here's the thing. Is moral choice always that clear? Sardy finds a kind of terrible clarity, but other writers, they challenge that whole idea. Just take this quote from Tim O'Brien, who basically argued that if a war story feels perfectly moral and makes you feel good, you've probably been lied to. It's this powerful reminder that while some stories are about the triumph of conscience, others drag us into that messy, ambiguous gray area where right and wrong are almost impossible to tell apart.
Okay, so after digging into identity, ambition, and morality, we circle back to the big question.
We've seen the conflicts, the pain, the choices. Why should we care about these stories that were written so long ago? What do they have to do with us?
They matter because they are our stories. That's why. They give a voice to the woman in the wallpaper who is silenced by her world. They question the same glossy, materialistic dreams that we're still being sold today. They put us right in Sardi's shoes and force us to ask, what would I do? And maybe most importantly, they show us that our deepest, most human struggles, they're not new. They're universal and they are timeless.
So in the end, that's what these stories really are. They're a mirror. And when we look into them, we don't just see characters from 100 years ago, we see ourselves. We see our conflicts, our fears, and our hopes, all reflected back with this kind of stunning and sometimes uncomfortable clarity.
Gilman, Fitzgerald, Faulkner, they all wrote their truth. They created this incredible blueprint of the human heart that can still guide us today through all our own struggles with identity, ambition, and choice. So the only question left is, what story will you write with yours?